All right, so we're back with evaluation part two, and this one we're going to get into kind of the questions that we ask with evaluation. However we use whatever design that we choose, the before and after, the with and without, and then think about the philosophy of science. So how do we really know what we know? Now, in this lecture on philosophy of science, in a typical class, if we were in the classroom, I'd engage in a really long discussion about this because this isn't something that students often um, really get to dig deep into, kind of these kind of deeper understandings around what is science and what is knowledge. But for this asynchronous approach, I encourage you to do a little bit more research on your own if there are concepts that you don't really get or things that you want to dig a bit deeper into, because this is really interesting stuff and it's kind of really cool. And it's the fundamental basis of how we really do science, understand what we know when it comes to science generally and public policies more specifically. So here we go. The foundational evaluation question. So, whatever kind of the approach, the before and after, the with and without that we take, as we discussed in the first slide in the setup to this, there are foundational questions. So, does something justify the public policy? Are the goals clear and is there data available? Can we evaluate? How does the program actually work? What's the process? What difference does the policy or program make? What is the impact? And then what are the trade-offs, the efficiency and equity, the other trade-offs that we talked about before? What are they and how do they impact the policy itself? And so you can go a bit deeper too, right? These kind of more deeper root understandings of the problem itself, right? So was this really the problem, right? So you're kind of fundamentally going back and doing that double loop learning and thinking, okay, well, we identified a problem, we attached a solution to it, and is it working or not? And did we really identify the problem? Is the policy design aligned to that problem itself? Was the implementation true to the policy design? Was it carried out as intended? Is there missing data? Was there blind spots that we didn't recognize when we were gathering the data to try to evaluate the public policy impact? Could we think about some different approaches that we're taking? So if we decide a before and after, could we think about adopting a more long-term time series approach to it? And then another deeper question, the kind of final one is, what do we do next, right? So public policies and public administration is always concerned with performance enhancement or performance improvement. So how do we improve next time around? So enter science. How do we actually know what we know, right? Policy analysis borrows from the broader scientific enterprise, right? It is doing science. I consider myself a social scientist, and I love this approach. If you think about the work that we do, it is very systematic. It is looking for evidence. It is aimed at explanation, and you hope that you have the power enough to predict. And so the scientific method, kind of go back to your elementary school class when you learned about this in your science, right? And think about how it can apply into a policy perspective. And so you're observing, right? You're looking at a social condition, you're developing theory or hypothesizing, or you're making testable propositions, you're collecting data, and you're analyzing it, and then you're concluding and revising your experiment, right? You're revising your hypothesis, right? And so it never really ends. Good science doesn't really end. And so as you kind of do this first approach, these 6 steps, then you're really thinking about policy interventions, and then you're going to go back through into that evaluation process that we talked about, right? So the philosophy of science, it kind of underpins the credibility of our claims. Metaphysics is concerned with what counts as reality. In the next slide, set of slides, so in the next slide deck, part 3, we'll get a bit deeper into the methods that we approach reality with. Epistemology concerns how can we know reality, right? So there's metaphysics, what is real? Epistemology, how do we know that it's real? And then our value is important. This is where axiology comes into play. So metaphysics is this reality check. Things like, is poverty a structural inevitability, or is it a policy choice that we can make, right? What is reality? An ontological stance is going to shape our causal stories, right? Shape how we kind of frame the problem, right? Shape how we say that this at time 1 leads to this at time 2. That kind of causal story. The links in the chain come from our ontological stance. Epistemology we kind of can think about knowledge claims in a number of different ways. We can think about it in a rational sense, in an empirical sense, or as a skeptic. Axiology, this does introduce the values, right? We are talking about the public sector. We are talking about public policies. And that also is going to bring in politics. And politics are values. We've talked about that so many different times. And so go back and think about our trade-offs that we discussed earlier in policy design, right? Think about kind of the outcomes of governance, right? Transparency, accountability, social justice. Values are going to steer the research questions. So from here, we're going to pick up this kind of what methods do we apply and how do they matter for crafting our policies and the evidence that we use to understand and evaluate those public policies. So I look forward to seeing you in the next part.